No lawyer. My sister Lauren's voice echoed through the courthouse hallway. You actually came here without a lawyer? A few people turned to look at us. Lauren smiled as if she had already won. Standing beside her was a sharply dressed attorney carrying a leather briefcase. My parents stood nearby, looking far more relaxed than they had any right to be. My mother crossed her arms. I told you she wouldn't take this seriously. I tightened my grip on the old folder in my hands. The truth was that I had taken this more seriously than anyone. For 6 months, I had spent every evening gathering documents, reviewing records, and trying to understand exactly how I had ended up in this situation. But none of that mattered to my family. All they saw was a woman standing alone. No attorney. No legal team. No expensive suit. Just me. Lauren laughed softly. This is embarrassing, Ava. I met her eyes but said nothing. He hated that. Lauren had always hated when she couldn't control the conversation. Growing up, she was the golden child. The smart one. The successful one. The one everyone praised. And I was simply Lauren's younger sister. Whenever something went wrong, somehow I was blamed. Whenever Lauren wanted something, she got it. The pattern never changed. Not when we were children. Not when we became adults. And definitely not after our grandmother died. That was when everything started. 3 years earlier, Grandma Eleanor passed away at 82. She was the only person in the family who treated me as if I mattered just as much as Lauren. She never played favorites. She never compared us. She loved us both. Or at least I thought she did. A week after her funeral, Lauren called a family meeting. I remember sitting in my parents' living room while everyone stared at a stack of papers on the coffee table. Lauren looked unusually pleased. My father cleared his throat. Your grandmother left most of her estate to Lauren. I blinked. What? Lauren slid a document toward me. The will. I read it twice. Then a third time. According to that document, Grandma had left Lauren nearly everything. The house. The investment accounts. The family land. Even several valuable antiques. I was left with $10,000. That was it. $10,000. After years of helping Grandma. Driving her to appointments. Managing repairs on her property. Spending holidays with her when nobody else showed up. $10,000. I remember feeling completely numb. It doesn't make sense. Lauren shrugged. It was her choice. My mother immediately agreed. Your sister shouldn't feel guilty because Grandma trusted her. Trusted her. The words stayed with me. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. Grandma had often told me that everything would be divided equally. Not once. Not twice. Dozens of times. Whenever I mentioned it, Lauren accused me of being jealous. My parents told me to move on. Eventually I tried. I used the small inheritance to pay off some debt and continued living my life. Meanwhile, Lauren's life transformed overnight. She sold part of the land. Renovated her house. Bought a luxury SUV. Took expensive vacations. Every family gathering became a celebration of her success. And every time I saw her enjoying assets that Grandma had spent decades building, a small voice inside me whispered the same thing. Something isn't right. I ignored that voice for nearly 2 years. Then one afternoon everything changed. I was cleaning my garage when I found an old cardboard box. It had belonged to Grandma. I had forgotten about it completely. Inside were photo albums, letters, receipts, and notebooks. Nothing unusual. Until I discovered a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in Grandma's handwriting. My hands started shaking. Because underneath my name were 4 words. Open only if necessary. At that moment I had no idea that the envelope would eventually lead me to a courtroom. Or that it would expose a secret powerful enough to destroy everything Lauren had built. And as I stepped into that courthouse years later, watching my sister smile confidently beside her expensive attorney, I remembered exactly what had been inside that envelope. Because the moment their lawyer saw it, everything changed. I didn't open the envelope right away. For nearly an hour I simply stared at it while sitting at my kitchen table. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandma Eleanor's. Every birthday card. Every Christmas letter. Every note she had ever written me looked exactly the same. The words, open only if necessary, kept repeating in my mind. Necessary for what? What had Grandma wanted me to find? And why had she hidden it instead of giving it to me directly? Eventually, curiosity won. I carefully broke the seal. Inside were 3 folded documents and a handwritten letter. The letter was on top. I unfolded it first. The moment I recognized Grandma's writing, tears filled my eyes. She had been gone for over 2 years, but suddenly it felt like she was sitting across from me again. The letter began simply. "My dear Ava, if you're reading this, then something has happened that made you question whether everything was handled honestly after I'm gone." I froze. My heartbeat quickened. Grandma continued. "I hope I'm wrong. I hope this envelope never becomes necessary. But I have learned that money can change people, even family." I read every word twice. Then 3 times. By the time I reached the final page, my hands were trembling. Because Grandma had described a fear she had never mentioned to anyone else. She was worried someone might try to manipulate her estate after her death. Specifically, she was worried about Lauren. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Grandma loved Lauren. How could she have suspected her of something like that? Then I looked at the documents underneath. And suddenly the letter made perfect sense. The first document was a copy of a will. Not the version Lauren had shown the family. A completely different version. This one divided everything equally. 50% to Lauren. 50% to me. Exactly as Grandma had always promised. I stared at the signature. The witness names. The notarization. Everything appeared legitimate. My stomach twisted. Because the will Lauren presented after Grandma's death looked nothing like this one. Not even close. I spent the entire night comparing the documents. The differences were enormous. Properties that had been shared equally were suddenly transferred solely to Lauren. Investment accounts had been reassigned. Entire sections were rewritten. By sunrise I knew one thing. Either the document in my hands was fake. Or the document Lauren used was fake. One of them couldn't be real. The second item in the envelope was even more disturbing. It was a notarized statement from Grandma's longtime attorney. A man named Richard Hayes. The statement confirmed that he had prepared the equal distribution will and stored copies in multiple locations. I immediately searched for him online. What I found shocked me. Richard Hayes had retired shortly after Grandma's death. And 6 months later he passed away from a heart condition. Meaning he couldn't answer any questions. Couldn't verify anything. Couldn't testify. The one person who might have explained everything was gone. I felt sick. For days I debated whether to pursue the matter. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe I was misunderstanding something. Maybe I was letting grief cloud my judgment. Then I looked at the third document. And every doubt disappeared. It was a property transfer record. One that had never been mentioned to me. According to the paperwork, Lauren had sold a large portion of Grandma's land only 3 months after inheriting it. The sale generated nearly $2 million. $2 million. I sat there staring at the number. While I was struggling to pay rent and working extra shifts, Lauren had quietly become a millionaire. And if Grandma's original will was valid, half of that money should have belonged to me. I finally understood why that small voice inside me had never gone away. Because deep down I had known something was wrong from the beginning. The next morning I contacted a legal consultant. Not a lawyer. Just someone willing to review public records. A week later he called me back. His voice sounded unusually serious. "Ava, where did you get these documents?" "Why?" There was a long pause. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Because if they're authentic, someone committed fraud." The room started spinning. Fraud. Not a misunderstanding. Not an accident. Fraud. I suddenly realized the situation was much bigger than an unfair inheritance. Someone may have deliberately stolen part of Grandma's estate. And every piece of evidence pointed toward one person. My sister. What I didn't know was that uncovering the truth would trigger a legal battle that would divide my family completely. A battle Lauren was absolutely convinced she would win. Because she had money. She had influence. She had the family's support. She would have one of the most powerful attorneys in the state standing beside her. But she still didn't know about the final piece of evidence hidden inside Grandma's records. The piece that would eventually make her lawyer go pale in open court. The moment the legal consultant mentioned fraud, my entire world changed. For weeks I barely slept. Every evening after work I sat at my dining room table surrounded by documents, notebooks and copies of public records. The more I investigated, the worse things looked. At first I hoped there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Grandma had changed her mind. Maybe there was a newer will. Maybe the paperwork had been filed incorrectly. But every trail led back to the same conclusion. Something had happened during the final months of Grandma's life. Something nobody had told me. And the center of it all was Lauren. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was the loneliness. My family immediately turned against me. The first confrontation happened when I asked my parents to meet for lunch. I brought copies of the documents from Grandma's envelope. I thought they'd want to know the truth. I couldn't have been more wrong. My father barely looked at the papers. My mother pushed them away completely. This again, she sighed. I stared at her. What do you mean, this again? Ava, your sister inherited the estate years ago. Because the will may have been changed. My mother rolled her eyes. There you go. There I go. You're obsessed. I felt my chest tighten. I'm showing you evidence. No, she said coldly. You're showing us excuses. The words hit harder than I expected. My father finally spoke. Lauren has done very well for herself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This isn't about her success. Then what is it about? It's about whether Grandma's wishes were ignored. My parents exchanged a glance. The same glance they had shared my entire life whenever Lauren and I disagreed. The glance that always meant one thing. Lauren was right. I was wrong. Meeting over. When I left the restaurant, I sat in my car and cried for nearly 20 minutes. Not because of the money. Because of the realization that nothing had changed. Even now. Even with evidence. Even with questions that deserved answers. They still chose her. A month later things got worse. Lauren invited me to dinner. At first I thought she wanted to talk. Instead it turned into an ambush. The moment I arrived, she placed a folder on the table. What is this? I asked. A warning. I opened it. Inside was a cease and desist letter. My stomach dropped. Lauren leaned back in her chair. You've been contacting people. I'm investigating Grandma's estate. You're harassing people. No. Actually, yes. I looked at her in disbelief. She smiled. The same smile she'd worn since childhood whenever she thought she had the upper hand. You need to let this go. What if I don't? Her expression hardened. Then I'll make you. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me for months. Did Grandma really leave everything to you? Lauren didn't answer immediately. Instead she took a sip of wine. Then she smiled. You'll never prove otherwise. The words sent a chill through me. Not because of what she said. Because of what she didn't say. She never denied it. Not once. That conversation convinced me to keep going. Over the next several months I gathered everything I could. Property records. Financial filings. Witness statements. Archived correspondence. Then one afternoon I discovered something that changed the entire case. A retired notary agreed to speak with me. She had worked in the same office that handled Grandma's estate documents. At first she remembered very little. Then I showed her copies of the signatures. Her eyes widened. I remember this family. My heart nearly stopped. You do. She nodded slowly. There was an argument. What kind of argument? She hesitated. Then lowered her voice. A serious one. According to her, someone had questioned paperwork related to Grandma's final will shortly before her death. The issue was never formally reported. But several employees had discussed it privately. I left the meeting shaking. For the first time, an independent witness had confirmed that concerns existed before Grandma passed away. That was the breakthrough I needed. 3 weeks later I filed a legal challenge. And all hell broke loose. Lauren immediately hired one of the most expensive attorneys in the state. Within days relatives began calling. Some begged me to stop. Others accused me of greed. A few blocked my number entirely. Even my parents publicly sided with Lauren. At a family gathering, my mother actually stood up and announced that I was trying to destroy the family. Nobody defended me. Nobody. Except one person. An elderly woman I barely knew approached me as I was leaving. She had been one of Grandma's closest friends. He squeezed my hand. Then she whispered 5 words. Your grandmother expected this. Before I could ask what she meant, she slipped a small folded note into my hand. A note that contained information nobody had mentioned before. Information connected to a storage unit. A storage unit that had remained untouched for nearly 3 years. And hidden inside it was the evidence that would eventually make Lauren's lawyer wish he had never accepted her case. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes staring at the note. A storage unit. That was all it said. Along with a unit number, an address, and a name I immediately recognized. Grandma Eleanor. My pulse raced. Why would Grandma have a storage unit nobody knew about? And more importantly, why had one of her closest friends waited until now to tell me? The next morning I drove across town before work. The storage facility wasn't fancy. Just a row of aging metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. The manager looked surprised when I showed him the paperwork. After verifying my identity and reviewing several documents from Grandma's estate, he finally nodded. "Looks like you're authorized." My hands trembled as he handed me the key. 3 years. The unit had been sitting untouched for 3 years. I walked down a narrow corridor until I reached the numbered door. For a moment I simply stood there. Then I unlocked it. The metal door rattled upward. Dust floated through the air. The unit wasn't large, but it was full. Boxes, filing cabinets, photo albums, old furniture, and dozens of carefully labeled folders. I immediately recognized Grandma's handwriting. Everything was organized. Everything. That was classic Grandma. She had always documented everything. Receipts, contracts, letters, bank statements, tax records. Nothing was ever thrown away. For the next several weekends I spent every free hour sorting through the contents. At first I found nothing useful. Family photographs, insurance records, old journals, property surveys. Interesting but not enough to prove fraud. Then during my 4th visit I discovered a locked metal box hidden inside a filing cabinet. Unlike everything else in the unit, this box wasn't labeled. And it had its own key taped beneath a shelf. Almost as if Grandma wanted someone specific to find it. Someone patient enough to keep looking. Someone she trusted. When the lock clicked open my stomach tightened. Inside were several flash drives. A small notebook. And a sealed envelope. The notebook immediately caught my attention. I opened it carefully. Every page contained dates, names, and observations written in Grandma's neat handwriting. As I read, a cold feeling spread through my chest. The entries covered the final year of her life. And many of them mentioned Lauren. At first the notes were harmless. Lauren visited today. Lauren offered to help organize financial papers. Lauren wants to review estate documents. But over time the tone changed. Lauren insists I should simplify the will. Lauren became upset when I refused. Argument lasted nearly an hour. I felt sick. The entries became increasingly concerning. Several months before Grandma's death, one note stood out from all the others. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. If anything happens to my estate plans, Ava must know that I never intended to favor one granddaughter over the other. I couldn't breathe. Those words alone didn't prove anything. But they confirmed what I had believed from the beginning. Grandma never intended for Lauren to inherit everything. Never. Then I opened the envelope. And everything changed. Inside was a letter addressed to her attorney Richard Hayes. The same attorney whose statement I found in the original envelope. The letter detailed concerns about pressure being placed on Grandma regarding her estate. Pressure from Lauren. Specific incidents. Specific dates. Specific conversations. I felt chills running down my arms. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was documentation. Direct documentation. But the most important discovery wasn't the notebook. Or the letter. It was one of the flash drives. When I plugged it into my laptop that night I found dozens of scan records. Bank statements. Legal drafts. Email correspondence. And one file labeled Final Meeting. I clicked it. A video opened. The recording quality wasn't perfect. But the voices were clear. The moment I heard Grandma speak, tears filled my eyes. Then Lauren's voice appeared. And within 5 minutes my entire case transformed. Because the recording captured an argument. A real argument. One involving Grandma's estate. I listened in complete shock. At one point, Lauren openly complained about splitting assets equally. At another point, Grandma firmly refused to change her wishes. The recording didn't directly prove forgery. But it destroyed Lauren's future defense. She could no longer claim Grandma wanted everything left to her. Grandma's own voice contradicted that claim. I barely slept that night. The next morning I copied every file and secured multiple backups. As I knew one thing. If Lauren discovered this evidence existed, she would do everything possible to discredit it. And soon she got the chance. Because after months of preparation, the court finally scheduled our hearing. The entire family planned to attend. Lauren arrived with a team of legal professionals. I arrived alone. At least that's what everyone believed. What nobody knew was that I was carrying evidence capable of destroying the foundation of Lauren's entire case. Evidence her attorney had never seen. Evidence that would force him to question everything his client had told him. And on the morning of the hearing, that evidence was sitting quietly inside the worn folder under my arm. The morning of the hearing felt strangely calm. Not because I wasn't nervous. I was terrified. My hands shook while I parked outside the courthouse. My stomach had been in knots since sunrise. But after everything I had discovered, fear no longer controlled me. For years, my family had treated me like I was irrational. Like I was jealous. Like I was chasing money. Now I knew the truth. And no matter what happened inside that courtroom, nobody could take that away from me. As I entered the building, I immediately spotted Lauren. She looked confident. Almost cheerful. She wore an expensive designer suit and stood beside her attorney, a man whose reputation alone intimidated most opponents. My parents stood nearby. Several relatives had shown up as well. The moment Lauren saw me, she smiled. There was no warmth in it. Only arrogance. Then came the comment everyone would remember later. The comment that would age terribly. She looked around dramatically before speaking. "Where's your lawyer?" A few relatives laughed. I said nothing. Lauren tilted her head. "Oh." Then she smiled wider. "No lawyer." The hallway grew quiet. People were listening now. Lauren folded her arms. "You're finished." A couple of family members nodded in agreement. My mother shook her head. Almost as if she felt embarrassed for me. My father avoided eye contact entirely. The attorney beside Lauren glanced toward me briefly. Then he returned to reviewing his notes. Clearly he wasn't concerned. Why would he be? From his perspective, this was a simple inheritance dispute involving a woman representing herself. He had no idea what was inside my folder. None of them did. The courtroom doors opened. The hearing began. At first, everything went exactly as Lauren expected. Her attorney was polished. Confident. Prepared. He presented documents. Property transfers. Estate records. Financial statements. Every piece of paperwork supported Lauren's version of events. To anyone watching, the outcome seemed obvious. Even the judge appeared skeptical of my challenge. Then my turn arrived. I stood. My legs felt weak. But my voice remained steady. I started with Grandma's letter. Then the alternate will. Then the attorney's statement. Lauren's lawyer dismissed each item one after another. Unverified. Questionable. Insufficient. Exactly what I expected. Then I introduced the notebook from the storage unit. For the first time, Lauren looked uncomfortable. Only slightly. But I noticed. Her attorney remained calm. Until I mentioned the recording. Everything changed. The lawyer stopped writing. Slowly he looked up. What recording? The courtroom became very quiet. I opened my folder. The recording found in my grandmother's secured storage unit. Lauren's face lost some color. The attorney turned toward her. Clearly surprised. Very surprised. I continued. The recording contains a discussion between my grandmother and my sister regarding the estate. The attorney's eyes narrowed. He leaned toward Lauren and whispered something. Lauren immediately shook her head. Too quickly. Far too quickly. That reaction told me everything. She knew exactly what recording I was talking about. The judge ordered the file to be reviewed. Minutes later, excerpts began playing. Grandma's voice filled the courtroom. Then Lauren's. The room was silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The recording wasn't dramatic. There were no confessions. No obvious admissions of fraud. But it established something incredibly important. Grandma repeatedly stated that she intended to treat both granddaughters equally. Repeatedly. Directly. The judge listened carefully. So did everyone else. Then the recording ended. Lauren's attorney looked troubled. For the first time all morning he appeared genuinely concerned. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I reached into my folder again and removed the final document. The one I had saved for last. The document I had discovered only 3 weeks before the hearing. The document connected to a digital archive hidden among Grandma's files. The courtroom clerk handed copies to the judge. One copy went to Lauren's attorney. I watched him scan the first page, then the second, then the third. His entire expression changed. The confidence disappeared. Completely. His eyes widened. He flipped back to the first page. Read it again. Then looked toward Lauren. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The courtroom felt frozen. Finally the attorney whispered something. Lauren's face went white. The lawyer looked down at the document once more. And that was the moment. The exact moment. The moment everyone in the room would later talk about. Because Lauren's attorney suddenly looked as if he had seen a ghost. The color drained from his face. His hand tightened around the papers. And for the first time since the hearing began, he looked scared. The courtroom was completely silent. Lauren's attorney stared at the document in front of him as though it had personally betrayed him. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the judge seemed curious. Finally the judge broke the silence. "Counselor, is there an issue?" The attorney looked up, then back down at the document. His confidence was gone. Every bit of it. I would like a moment to confer with my client." A murmur spread through the room. I saw my mother frown. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Lauren looked terrified. Not nervous. Terrified. Because she knew exactly what the attorney had just read. The judge granted a brief recess. Lauren and her lawyer immediately stepped into a private conference room. But not before I caught part of their conversation. "What is this?" the attorney hissed. Lauren's answer was barely audible. "I thought it was destroyed." Destroyed. The words echoed in my head. Destroyed. At that moment I knew we were close. Very close. 20 minutes later, everyone returned to the courtroom. Lauren looked like a completely different person. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the smile she wore in the hallway. Her attorney looked equally shaken. The judge addressed him directly. "Have you reviewed the evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And?" The attorney took a long breath. Then said something nobody expected. "Based on newly presented documentation, I am no longer confident that the estate records previously relied upon accurately reflect the decedent's intentions." The room exploded with whispers. My mother looked stunned. My father blinked repeatedly. Several relatives exchanged shocked glances. Lauren stared straight ahead, unable to look at anyone. The judge requested clarification. The attorney reluctantly explained. The document I had presented wasn't merely another copy of Grandma's will. It was a certified archive report from the legal document service Richard Hayes had used. One that had been recovered through the digital files in the storage unit. The report contained timestamps, revision histories, authentication records, and most importantly, evidence that Grandma's equal distribution will was the final verified version created during her lifetime. There was no record showing that Grandma ever authorized the version that left nearly everything to Lauren. None. Even worse for Lauren, the report showed unusual activity occurring after Grandma became medically incapacitated. Activity involving estate documents. Activity investigators would later examine very closely. The judge's expression hardened. Very quickly. Within an hour, the hearing transformed from an inheritance dispute into something much more serious. The court ordered a formal investigation. Several property transfers were frozen. Financial distributions were reviewed. And Lauren's claimed ownership of major assets suddenly became uncertain. By the end of the day she wasn't celebrating. She was facing questions she couldn't answer. The following months were brutal. Investigators uncovered multiple irregularities. Signatures that required further verification. Document revisions that lacked proper authorization. Financial transactions that raised concerns. Eventually settlements were negotiated. Assets were redistributed. Properties were re-evaluated. Funds were recovered. In the end, I received the portion of Grandma's estate that should have been mine from the beginning. But the money wasn't what mattered most. The truth did. For years my family treated me like the problem. The troublemaker. The jealous sister. The one who couldn't move on. Now they knew why I never stopped asking questions. Because I had been right. The hardest consequences weren't financial. They were personal. Lauren's reputation collapsed. Many relatives distanced themselves. Professional relationships disappeared. Trust vanished. And once trust disappears, rebuilding it is almost impossible. My parents struggled with the truth even more. Especially my mother. One evening, nearly a year after the hearing, she called me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said something I had waited my entire life to hear. "We should have listened to you." I closed my eyes. Not because the words fixed everything. They didn't. Years of favoritism don't disappear overnight. But hearing them mattered. More than she realized. Today, Grandma's house belongs to both of us exactly as she intended. Half mine. Half placed into a charitable trust that supports local senior programs. A decision reached during the final settlement. Sometimes I sit on the front porch and think about her. About the envelopes she left behind. About the storage unit. About the evidence she carefully preserved. And about the reason she did it. Grandma understood something important. Truth doesn't always win quickly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes people laugh at you while you're fighting for it. Sometimes they tell you you're finished. I still remember Lauren's voice in that courthouse hallway. "No lawyer. You're finished." He was so certain. So confident. So convinced that money and power would protect her. But she forgot one thing. The truth doesn't care who has the bigger lawyer. And when the truth finally walked into that courtroom, even her attorney turned pale.